Today I'm speaking with Summer Biby. Summer, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello.
And did I get your pronunciation of your last name correct?
Yes,
okay.
Biby is correct.
And I wanted to give a brief bio for Summer, but before I do, I wanted to ask, can you tell us, what are you wearing?
This is my Bernie shirt, of course.
The man, the mittens, the legend. I love it.
Those names were hilarious. I had to jump on and commemorate.
They're about everywhere these days. Yeah. Well, Summer is from Indiana, not far from Chicago. She's a mother of 4, and just wanted to give a few bits of information about her, then I'll ask her to fill in a little bit more. Summer grew up in the Church of God, Pentecostal kind of upbringing, and she also got involved in ministry there. She was an active worship leader for the youth ministry, drama team director, which is cool, and pretty much the right-hand minister to the youth pastor in a support role. And in addition to that, there's a whole big story we're going to go through in a few minutes, but could you tell us anything else that I missed about you? Any hobbies that I'd like to highlight?
Just the things that I do like in my spare time. I'm a rugby player. I play rugby. I didn't even know I had some, pent-up aggression in there because I'm a very bubbly, happy person, but turns out
helmet or not?
No helmet. Rugby is no pads, no anything, full contact.
The real deal.
80 minutes of, I've always been considered a very kind person. So I actually took me a little bit to find my grit for the sport. But once I did, it's my passion. Hope to coach eventually. I'm getting older too. I'm 35, so it's beating me up a little bit. I'm a cosmetologist. I'm not working right now though to take care of my 2 little ones because they're only 2 and 2.5. So they keep me extremely busy, especially in this pandemic. So that's about. I'm a writer. I love to write. Very passionate person. I can tell that my words carry a lot of weight when I share my story. So I hope to author a book one day. Those are my aspirations.
That's awesome. And I should add too, how we connected, or a couple ways we connected. One of them was through a Facebook group, but also Summer has a YouTube channel, which I've got a link beneath our video for you all to go check out. I highly recommend you do it. Summer, as you'll probably see here in just a few minutes, Summer has an energy and a clarity that is infectious, and I think a lot of us need to hear, because a lot of us are dealing with some good stuff. We're dealing with a lot of behind the scenes studying, a lot of work with the mythology, trying to study Josephus and then the book of Enoch and the Essenes and the Qumran and the Dead Sea Scrolls and all that stuff. It's really important. Mithraism, the mystery cults. It's great stuff to study, but when it comes down to it, this is about having a passion for life. This is not about just saying, well, I know what isn't true. I know where the darkness is. This is about turning from the darkness and lighting candles, shining spotlights on the beauty of life. And if you watch Summer's videos, you will see it is addicting. Summer, you bring energy to this that we need. So I hope your voice truly gets, so strong in this. And I hope people just flock to your videos, and I hope you keep getting encouragement to do more.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to hear that, because one of the things that I think we're afraid of when we leave the church, I know I mentioned this in conversation with you, but all of these charismatic spiritual gifts are attributed to the Holy Spirit in our life. And we sometimes don't even identify what's good about us outside of God, because that's the center of everything that, we're doing. So to come out of it and to still feel this alive and excited about life, it's just a reminder that this is who I am. This has always been who I am, because when you leave the faith that you're raised in, there's that, anytime your foundation crumbles, it's just really scary to rebuild everything from the ground up. Everything that you ever believed was based on that foundation. And once you start taking a hammer to it, it's really scary. You're like, what am I going to look like after this? How am I even going to recover? What do I believe now? Where do I even start? How do I rebuild?
Yeah, it really feels like it's like the carpet gets pulled out from under you, and it's so necessary, and it's inevitable. Like if you actually deconvert for the right reasons. I've seen people that deconvert just because some pastor made them angry, so I'm not a Christian anymore, and then they come back to Christ later because someone gave them a big hug, and oh, I guess Christ does love me, so I'm a Christian again. But like an actual real deconversion where you actually study the origins of the Yahweh character, the origins
Yes.
of Christianity. You study early church history with all the information. You truly deconvert. You couldn't get back into Christianity if you wanted to at that point, but it is like this. It's if your identity is wrapped up in it, it's so hard to just be like, well, who am I then? How do I live? And what, all questions from, morality, what do I do with that question?
Yeah.
What's my life all about? What's my purpose? And just so much, and a lot of healing, of course. Well, I'm just looking at my notes here. I wanted to make sure I did give a quick icebreaker.
Okay.
And this will be quick because I've been told my icebreakers are too long. But if you're at Starbucks, what's your favorite drink to order?
Caramel frappuccino.
Nice.
Yes. Yeah.
Very nice. Well,
I drink coffee all day, so I get the extra sweet ones when I'm out and about.
Nice. Very nice. Yeah, I'm a coffee drinker too, although I do like a good cold iced tea sometimes. Just for way of introduction, I know we're going to talk a lot about your deconversion, all that's happened since then, but could you give us, kind of go all the way back, start us at the part where, how were you raised? What were the truths you were taught? What was your childhood like?
Okay, so my parents got saved when I was 2. Okay. So they quickly got married because they had me out of wedlock. So they quickly got married. They were, really, all or nothing in this thing. My dad is a very extremist personality, very charismatic like myself. And, he was sold out to this thing. So I was raised in the church. I mean, I have the stories of me as a toddler, praising and worshiping in the pews of the church.
Do you know was that the church you grew up in, was that the Church of Christ, or was that a different or Church of God?
Church of God. So my grandparents went to a church called Family Christian Center. So that was a really big church here in Munster. I mean, they were like on TV and stuff. So that was almost like too big. My dad couldn't find his place there, and made friends at another local church that kind of had people from both congregations coming in and out a little bit. And that was South Lake Worship Center, as we call it now, but it's South Lake Church of God originally. So yeah, and we stuck there our whole lives. Like that was it. That was the church. That's still what I would consider, my home in many ways. I don't feel nearly the same when I walk in the doors, but the people that I loved even as a kid still go there. Yeah,
unfortunately a lot of people really, it's hard to escape. It becomes such a part of you. Can I ask a couple of questions as like a baseline,
Sure.
Just because I know different people have different certainly different backgrounds in terms of what they were taught. What were you taught first about the Bible? Was it inerrant? Was it infallible?
The Bible was inerrant, and there were, even though other people were studying different translations, my dad was a King James only. Eventually, our pastor really got us on the New American Standard Bible. For some reason, my dad warmed up to other translations. I think a lot of that was my doing, because I started studying the Greek and Hebrew and kind of explained that a lot of the translations are a little screwed up, so we should kind of take them all in. I love words, so I didn't go anywhere without my concordance. I mean, literally, like I had one that I kept in my car, and then I had my bag that I'd carry everywhere, just in case, the Spirit struck me and I needed to research or study something. So yeah, the Bible was inerrant. Everything was literal. Even God wiping the world out with the flood and Noah's Ark, those were all real things that happened as far as I understood. The creation story, even though there's so many both times that the creation story is told, they're slightly different from each other, but I don't know how we rationalized that back then, but
so you would have probably believed in a very young earth, I assume.
Yes, I was told that dinosaurs were lies, that science was just trying to destroy our belief in God. So it actually makes me emotional to think about this now. But because my education was stolen from me in many ways, I was not allowed to be taught things like evolution. I've got my nose stuck in all kinds of evolution books now, but growing up, that was taboo. I remember my dad having, there was a teacher in our church, a science teacher, and I remember him having just an overall bad view of him just because he taught science. Like, that's how extreme my father could be about what he believed at the time, what he believed to be right and wrong. He was very black and white.
Yeah.
There
Religion
usually
seems
wasn't
to do that
any,
to a lot of people. At least
yeah, there really
certain parts
wasn't.
of it.
My dad needed structure. He still needs structure. I understand why he plugged in to it, which is unfortunate, but yeah, I get it, because I'm always looking for a new, structure to tell me what I'm supposed to be doing. It was so cool to have a whole book with all the answers in it, and now I just got to put everything together myself. It's a very different world.
It is. Well, I know a little bit about the whole King James stuff. I wasn't into it neck deep, but it's funny. I actually going way back here, but because you mentioned you're 35 and you're feeling old. I've got about 10 years on you, so I'm a real old man. But I remember going way back. A girl I dated when I was a teenager, older teenager, and she was from a King James only perspective, and I remember some very difficult discussions and thinking, if this works out, we're gonna have to figure this out, because we were otherwise, at that time at least, a good fit, but the King James only thing was like the major stumbling block. And then I went to Bob Jones University for a year, which was, I don't know if you've heard of that, but that's a very conservative school. And the good thing was, it was really cool about the King James thing is there were more conservative schools, such as Pensacola Christian College in Florida, that would be like King James only, straight up, at least at that time. And I was really proud of the Bob Jones Greek department. They came out publicly and said, look, we're not King James only, and it's the right path. We're proud of it. And I was like, that's really cool that they would stand up for the truth, even though there were probably a lot of King James people at Bob Jones at that time.
Yeah. So a thought about that is, if you're a black and white person and you admit that some translations could possibly have errors, if you're not just picking one, then that starts to unravel the potential that men actually affected, the Holy Spirit translating the scriptures properly for us. So I know that's why my dad was so hung up on it, and why many people can be just sticking to one translation. And I remember doing a deep dive into the King James version, and the things that weren't great about it. And I remember my dad, because he had a Dakes Bible, he was real big on the Dakes Bible because it had all the footnotes and stuff. A lot of that research was done for him that way. And just trying to get him to see that, as we evolve in our Christian faith, and as men kind of see God in the Bible, our perspective is tossed in there a little bit, especially with language, because language doesn't translate perfectly. So I remember kind of being able to break him away from that. But that was probably one of the beginnings of, one of the little cracks in my structure, because my dad was so black and white, that kind of started me to think a little bit more outside of the box.
Yeah, and that idea of the crack in the structure is a great, it's a great metaphor and a great maybe starting point for some of what we're going to talk about as we go further. But it's the idea that for a lot of us, if you're looking at a door that maybe there's a lot of light on one side and the other side is darkness, but as long as it's closed, the light can't come through. But if you open it just a crack, if the light on the other side is so bright, it just shines in. But you can't have any of it until you have at least a crack. And getting that door to open, and it's amazing how some of those things can, even simple benign things like just studying science a little bit, or studying that. I think a related one I would love to ask here before we go into the next part of my question was, I'm assuming you weren't really taught, I wasn't taught, about how there were, how the Bible was put together in terms of canonicity. I'm assuming you were never told that there were 40, 50 different gospels, that there were 6 different books of Acts. That's probably stuff doesn't even come up, right?
No, I discovered those things and shared them with my father. Hey man, there's stuff left out of the Bible. How can we trust these people? How do we know? And then he would just always be the Holy Spirit, I'm sure, directed these men. I'm like, there were like a lot of men though. And people get things wrong when it comes to prophecy all the time, because you're like seeing that happen in the church. I was like, how do we know? And you just trust that God, had his hand on the situation and he chose what went in and what didn't. So that was kind of our, what we would lean into on that when I would question how the Bible even got put together. But I was eager to get my hands on those other canons to see what was going on,
Yeah.
What we missed out on.
It's true. Yeah, and I spent a lot of my time in those. I'm currently going through a whole bunch of other books, including the Book of Enoch, and a lot of other. A lot of this, as I'm learning, is if you really are serious about studying the origins of Christianity, like it's one of the biggest aspects of this is Second Temple Judaism. Like if people don't understand what happened in the 200 and 300 years coming up to when quote unquote Christ came. If they don't understand the influence, for example, the big influence of things like Hellenism, Alexander the Great, Zoroastrianism,
Yes.
and all that. But if you left those out, just if you focus on all the writings in between the canon, between the Old and New Testament, there is so much there that explains so much. And a lot of Christians don't realize that their Bible, their New Testament, is actually quoting those books like dozens and dozens and dozens of times, and they don't realize that to realize your New Testament, not the, I'm sure there's others that may be more broad like the Catholic canon, but to realize that our Protestant New Testament quotes the Book of Enoch like 100 times. It quotes the Book of Jubilees dozens of times. It quotes the Book of Ben Sira. It quotes Maccabees. It quotes a whole bunch of other books in addition to all kinds of other issues. And it's like you're not reading the New Testament. You're reading the New Testament that's littered with Second Temple Judaism writings, and without any knowledge of what those were, people are just like, it makes me think a lot about like if it were today and you were to pick up like how Star Wars has like the 9 movies now. If you were to like pick up around movie 8 or 9 and act like, oh, the first 6 or 7 movies never happened, and you try to and then build a religion off of the first 2, you'd probably get some things pretty right, but you get some things where you just missed it because you didn't have the first chunk of this set of movies. And that's like what happened is Christians got these very, very, very final versions that were heavily edited and redacted, and versions themselves of other documents. And then they took them, and then the church from there took out parts that they didn't like, and then they argued for hundreds of years over the Book of Revelation and James and Hebrews. They still didn't know what was real, and even people don't realize the Old Testament was not canonized until after the church was formed. It's like even the Old Testament wasn't canonized yet, and yet we're like, somehow this is God preserving it. It's a mess. It's still a mess. Even with today's scholarship, it's a mess. Anyway, that's a side note, but that's why my mind is there.
To me. You're okay.
Well, going back to the church, what was your teaching on sin and hell?
So definitely like a real hell. And
meaning a burning and torture forever.
Yes, you're burning and torturing forever. And my dad lived really in this cloak of guilt and shame and fear. And I was going, I didn't want any of that, but I just knew that my relationship with God was so strong. I really just never fell into the fear of hell, even though I knew it existed. It like wasn't even a thought, because other than saving other people from it, I really never had the fears that my salvation was in jeopardy, even though like my dad, I don't care. I asked my mother when I was younger, and I used to cry myself to sleep about going to hell. So I was scared as a small child about hell, but eventually as I matured, that no longer was really anything that I held on to. But I remember asking my mom as a little girl, if I don't ask for forgiveness for something, what happens? What if I can't remember a sin? And she would say, honey, I mean, you have to ask forgiveness for all of your sins, or, you can go to hell. And I remember just like, I mean, I'm like a 6-year-old, crying my eyes out at night, trying to remember anything that I didn't even know was a sin. God, if I did something wrong and I didn't know about it, can you show me right now so that I can ask, you to forgive me for all my sins, whatever they were, but I want to learn from them. And, I was just like always searching my heart to not do anything wrong. Cause my dad, if you weren't showing him the fruits of, the Spirit and living life, he judged everybody's salvation and in a very extreme way. I don't care if you smoked a cigarette in front of him. Now, if you didn't repent for that and give it up, you're going to hell, even though that's not even like anything in the scriptures, but that's
almost like a spiritual gift in the sense of being able to discern. It can come across as critical when we did that as Christians, but it's also the positive aspect, I guess, from a Christian perspective, is that in trying to discern who's really saved, you can much more quickly hone in who really needs the gospel because they're not really clear on it. And therefore you need to have your spidey senses up, so to speak, and be like, that person sounds wishy-washy on the gospel, because it's, if the Lord's living in you, the Holy Spirit's transforming you, it's going to show through. The joy of the Lord will be your strength. The word will not go out and return without having accomplished what God made it to do. So and especially if you go down the route I did, which was Calvinism, if you're elect, then God picked you. So clearly he started it. He's going to take it to fulfillment. I think it's Philippians 1:6. He who began a good work in you will bring it to the day of completion, or whatever. I'm botching that up, but I spend too much time in Enoch these days, not as much in Philippians. But he'll bring it to the day of completion, and he'll make you a new person. The fruit of the Spirit will shine through. And so you need to know who needs the gospel and who's really just playing it and trying to be casual Christian. But and did you get the threat added to that of the Left Behind kind of stuff, or the whole rapture deal?
Oh God, it was horrible. My dad made me watch those movies because they were from the 70s, but I remember he discovered them when I was about 7 or 8 years old. And so I watched every
A Thief in the Night.
And that, A Thief in the Night. I actually have that written down because that was one of the things that was very traumatizing for me as a kid. And I remember an interview you did with another woman, I cannot remember her name, but she brought up those movies, and they were horrible. That was probably the time where I was crying myself to sleep.
So you were afraid that you might be potentially one of the ones that were not going to be taken up in the rapture, that you might have to go through the tribulation.
I was just always afraid I was going to forget a sin and forget to ask. My heart was very pure. I was probably one of the most goodiest, two-shoeist kids that there could be. I, never directly disobeyed my parents. I got mouthy, and my mother and I fought a lot. But honestly, my childhood, I was like my dad's favorite, and it was very clear, and almost to where I took the place of my mother in an unhealthy way. So that affected me and my mom's relationship a lot. And we argued, and I just remember feeling so much guilt about that, because I really just wanted my, the headship and my parents to be how they're supposed to be, and then me to be where I'm supposed to be. And there was always like a struggle with if that was right or wrong. Even as a kid, like I could see that stuff for myself, and wanted it to be right so that I would be right in God's eyes. And that was a big, I never wanted to do anything wrong, ever. I was very much a people pleaser. I listened to my parents. I followed all the rules.
Yeah. And when you bring that into a Christian context, it works very well, because you can clearly kind of, whether it was a personality issue or a volitional choice, you can bring it into like, look, I want to make a difference for God. I want to be obedient to his commands. And especially if you're like in a youth group and you're hearing Christian songs and Vacation Bible School and blah, blah, blah. It's like, unless you're one of those people that I've heard of some, and met a few where just like by age 5 or 6 or 7, they're like, this doesn't make sense even as a little kid. But most people do not have the wherewithal, I certainly didn't, to say that at such a young age. They're wrapped up in what they're told is true. And so it's very quickly like, hey, I might be good because it's kind of my personality. I might be a people pleaser, but I also really do now want to translate that into, I want to obey God. I want to make a shining example of, a light on the hill. I was curious too, what was your basically your actual salvation message that was given? What was the gospel, and at what point did you actually make that profession? And maybe a corollary, did you add to it anything where you had to reaffirm it? Like some people feel like they need to kind of double check later on that, like, just in case it wasn't really the first time, I'm going to go through this again and just be crystal
Yeah.
clear with myself.
Yeah, I often would say the sinner's prayer, especially if I was like leading somebody else through it again. I would just kind of like check myself with God, essentially. But I never related to, when you're raised in the church, songs like Amazing Grace and stuff, they almost kind of like, I don't really have a salvation story. I was preserved by God. That's my salvation story. I never had to fall into the pits of sin or or discover God. I always just kind of felt like I was just so favored by him that he protected me and preserved me. That essentially is what became my salvation story. I remember getting baptized when I was 11.
Okay.
Because that's kind of where my dad thought the age of accountability would set in, I guess. There were no hard lines about that, but
do you remember like when you actually prayed the first time to say, like, did someone walk you through it and say, you actually need to place your faith in Christ, you're ready to do it today? Like a salvation
I
call?
don't remember a turning point like that. No, I
Okay.
think for me, that was essentially when I got baptized in water.
Okay.
Even though I always considered myself a Christian, and I'm sure my dad walked me through those prayers when I was really little, just numerous times, because he was so afraid of people losing their salvation. But nothing significant stands out to me because it just always was for me. Yeah. I never really felt like a turning away from anything.
And it's funny how there's a double-edged sword to that, because it's like you feel like you want something more dramatic to say, I was this and God turned me into that. But at the same time, it's like a source of pride of like, this is an ideal to get to a point where, you're generationally improving.
Yes.
And to get to a point where everyone in your family is a Christian, maybe in generation 1, and then generation 2, you got a family full of people on fire for God. And by generation 3, you're all missionaries. You're all going to India and jungles, and it's like and pastures all over.
Yep. Yeah, and that I would raise my kids to be these mighty warriors for the Lord. That was the plan. I chose their names based on what I wanted them to do for the Lord. Like, it was very, very much in everything that I did.
Well, probably a lot of people that watch my channel would know what the gospel is, but just for the people that might be from a different faith background that might be watching, could you walk us through what is the gospel according to Jesus, according to the New Testament? What is the gospel message? How do you get peace with God?
So what I was taught was that you had to say the sinner's prayer, which is essentially just confessing all of your sins, turning away from anything that was not of God. So even anything worldly. And like I said, my dad took that to the extreme, even though a lot of members in the church defined things differently. So turning completely away from anything that's worldly and serving God with your life. So that just meant essentially not sinning and trusting God to help you figure out how to do that. But I remember in our church, it was very much expected to be a complete turnaround. Our salvation message was there wasn't a whole lot of room for growing into salvation. It was like either God did a miraculous work in you or you need to go try again, because it should be like a Holy Spirit filled encounter that you can't ever turn away from. So scripturally, though, it was just about saying the sinner's prayer, acknowledging that you needed Christ, that he died for your sins. Obviously, that was like the biggest component, that he died for your sins and that you believed that he died for your sins, and then he gave his life for you. And now you're going to give your life for him. So that's what.
And just to add to that, the idea too of with the sinner's prayer, and I apologize, some people probably heard this too many times and they don't want to be reminded, they don't want to be triggered for sure. But just for anyone who doesn't know it, what we're talking about here is the idea that we are condemned as who we are, and it's like a double condemnation. You're condemned because of what you do. Talk back to your mom, you do steal something, you do think bad about somebody, you do hurt people, and you do also though get doubly condemned because we're technically in Adam. We're identified with Adam as the curse. The curse. And of course, I've learned that it's actually also a lot in Eve, which it's not as much written that way in the book of Romans, but in the pastoral epistles in First Timothy, it talks about how, Eve was the first, so she was the one that caused him to stumble, and that's part of what her role is now. But if you look at the Second Temple books,
Okay.
they take that to such an extreme that when you look at what they did to Eve and how bad she was and what she did to people, what she did to humanity, Eve gets so much more blame. I know it looks like it's all Adam and Romans, but Eve is a bad person too, according to a lot of the other books that they had in their minds right before the New Testament came around. And so
I can name a few pastors who would probably agree that it's more Eve's fault than anyone's. I've heard variations of that teaching for sure, where no one likes to place equal blame for some reason, like we're human beings that screwed up. It's always got to be like one or the other did it worse. Yeah, and I can see how it's acknowledging that you need, that you are broken and that you need God. Obviously, that's it's crazy because I didn't have like a salvation story. I feel like sometimes I forget what I would even need to tell people to do to get saved, because it didn't feel like that for me.
I couldn't find what I was going to share,
Okay.
but in addition to this whole idea of you're condemned, there is this idea that there's an aspect of God's justice where God says you're condemned, but it's not just because of what you do in and of yourself. You're in a context of holiness versus unholiness. God is very other, and he can't accept it. And it was like this idea almost like God he can't even look at you because you're so bad. And he's so hot, his holiness is so pure, hot white that he would almost incinerate you, so to speak, if he could see you, but especially in a sinful state. And it's this idea that God just can't let you into heaven in the state you're in. You are depraved. You are truly depraved. You are truly condemned. And the idea, especially when you really get theologically into it with Romans, is that we're not dying and we're not getting condemned. We are judicially already pre-condemned. It's like you're not drowning in the ocean. You are the corpse at the bottom. You cannot even reach up to God without God first reaching down and giving you the desire and the ability to even the faith to believe, even though you'd say, well, I have faith. Even that, according to Ephesians 2:8-9, even the faith that you have to say, God, I turn to you, even that is from God. And not just the gift of salvation, but the faith to believe in his gift is a gift. And that difference where we're so far below it is what creates this context for the gospel, which means good news. And then the good news, as you said, is that Jesus is our is the one who takes care of the issue for us. He takes our punishment, what we deserve, and that by asking him to be our savior, to be our redeemer, we inherit his righteousness. It gets placed on us as if someone said, I, the judge, condemn you, and then said, I condemn you to death. And then someone else came up, and where it said, Tim deserves to die, they scratched that name out and said, Jesus deserves to die, and then he goes and dies. He takes your place. And then where it says Jesus was pure and innocent, they put by him, Tim is pure and innocent. And it's like you get to switch places and get his righteousness applied to you. And that's the gospel, is that God is in the business of taking people that are slaves and dead to him, dead in sin, slaves to their sinfulness, and he's in the business of redeeming them, pulling them out of the depths of their despair and of hell, and saying, I want to make you right. I want to, this chasm, this bridge, this gulf that we can't cross to God. He's going to build a bridge, and that bridge is Christ. That's the gospel. And I got to ask, now that you're on the other side of it, this is the big question. What is wrong with the gospel? What's the problem with that?
Well, one thing that I remember sharing this on my Facebook of like a couple months ago, and I had some people get pretty mad at me. It was kind of one of my kind ways of saying something a little divisive that I felt like needed to be said. But I asked people to stop telling their children that they're broken. Stop sowing this lie, this untruth into their hearts that there's something wrong with them, because you're setting them up for like cult thinking and being, buying into something that's bullshit, when truly they're amazing, perfect little people. Like, they're so awesome. There's nothing wrong with my kids, and seeing my children like
Here's one of them.
grow. And there's a little one. Hi.
Say hi. You want to say hi real quick?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is Summer. Say hi, Summer.
Hi.
Say hi, Summer.
Hi, Summer.
Hi.
Abby was very, very excited to see your pink hair.
A little pinky purple going on there.
Yeah.
I
Abby
love
has
your name, Abby.
Abby has occasionally called herself Pinkalicious, haven't you?
Yeah.
All right. Hold on one second. Did you need?
Yeah,
did you
you're
need me?
fine.
Did you need me for something? Are you okay? What is the issue with the gospel that people aren't realizing as they embrace it, as they share it? You know, what is it about it where people say the gospel is so beautiful, and now we on the other side would say absolutely that is not true? What is the issue with the gospel?
For me, it's thinking that you're broken and that something needs to be fixed in you. It's essentially breaking people, you know, like we have plenty of things that wear us down in life, you know, so then I feel like Christianity preys on that feeling of failure that we have in ourselves. It names it, and then it gives you a solution to the problem. And I think that's just a lie. And it's not true that there's something wrong with us that salvation can fix.
Yeah.
There's nothing to be saved from.
Yeah.
Nothing.
And when you dig in, you realize, I think you're hitting on the topic too, that this is in part the issue with what did God set up? Like, did God create people? You look just at, looking very narrowly at Adam and Eve, but if you were to say God created people to, where they had to be perfect, they had to do everything right, or he was going to kick them out and condemn them. And in this perfect place where they're as innocent as doves, they're as innocent as children, as new as children potentially, they get the worst enemy of their souls allowed entrance to this little paradise, and God there's no one there to protect. They're just allowed this. It's like allowing a predator in your nursery. And then when they actually fall prey to the predator, the punishment in the long run is eternal punishment. And I've got to add, I love the idea too of this picture that, do you know Pine Creek? Do you watch Pine Creek at all?
No.
Pine Creek, I'll have his link beneath the video, but you got to watch Pine Creek.
Okay.
Gotta watch Pine Creek. Pine Creek is the bomb. But he paints this picture of, like, if you were to look at the Noah story and you were to see how God condemns everybody, not just the bad people. And I understand that, theologically people say, oh, well, there is no one good. No one has done good. No, not one. There's no one righteous before God. But when you look at Noah and you see how God says there's bad and he just wipes everybody out. If you were to take it to a current story where you were to say, all right, some guy attacks a bunch of girls, really bad, does horrible things to them, and then they catch him. And they're in this court, and the judge says, Mr. Criminal, I condemn you to death for your crimes. And everyone would say, justice has been served. He did a horrible, horrible thing. This is what he deserves. And then, as he's saying that, he turns to the girls, the victims, and he says, oh, by the way, you die too. Everyone would be like, what? Why would the girls who are the victims die in this? What are you talking about? And we would, if that actually happened today, we would be horrified. And yet you look at the book of the story of Noah, and you're talking about, little babies that were born 10 hours earlier, got drowned. Little old, grandmas that just love to watch their grandkids and love on their kids. They're drowning. Everybody's drowning. The animals are drowning. God hates animals. And it's like, I know there's a lot of other insane things about the Noah story, but even if philosophically, you're talking about what amounts to a psychopathic God.
Yes. Yeah. A lot of people leave church angry with God or with people. That's one of the reasons they leave. I was never angry with anybody. But now that I look back, I'm like, why wasn't I angry with God? Why wasn't I okay with this stuff? Actually, one of my first tiffs with scripture that I really struggled with was the story of Jacob and Esau in Romans 9:12, where it basically says the potter can make whatever he wants to make of the vessel. If he wants you to be a trash bin, then you're a trash bin. And I was like, that's really shitty. Like, so are you telling me? And then my first taste of Calvinism, I was like, no, this is not, what is with all this favoritism? I'm a very like equality, everything should be fair across the board kind of a person. And that just like, it was one of those things that haunted me. I really had to dig into the scripture. I can't remember now how I reasoned it back then. But I remember that being another crack in my foundation story was, man, God actually created us knowing that we would never come to salvation. How horrible is that? I mean, he knew some of us would just burn in hell. It was never, when I realized it wasn't ever going to be a story of everybody can get saved, that like some people had to go to hell. I just couldn't believe that with the positivity and the person that I was. That did not sit right with me. And I really, really struggled with that, especially the scripture that specifically says, Jacob I loved and Esau I hated. And then it doesn't matter if that's just a parallel to like Israel and Gentiles. I don't freaking care. It pissed me off that God had a favorite people. I was like, that's bullshit. Like, it's not fair. I saw how favoritism affected my household. Like, much less you do that with the whole world. That's disaster. That's just, it was never okay in my spirit. I didn't ever find peace with that. I tried to just take it as it was about Israel and Gentiles and stuff, but then we could bring everybody into salvation anyways. So that was the best I could do with that mess at the time. I just, it was weeks and weeks of really in deep study to get through that hiccup. I was probably about 15 at the time, and I was ready to throw the whole dang book away. When I was like, how can God hate anybody? When it said God hated Esau, I was so angry. I was so angry with even the thought of that. Yeah. And then, it's like, oh, well, he hated his sin. That bull crap. I'm very empathetic person. So the way the church treated LGBTQ teens and stuff really bothered me. Those were kind of things that started to rock my boat a lot too. One of the big reasons I ended up walking away as well was that stuff. How could a God ever create something that he knew he was just going to hate or destroy at some point? It just seemed so cruel. Yeah. It is. It's cruel.
I think it's such an important thing to, and I want to get back to your story in a second because that's where our focus should be. But since we're on this, I do want to kind of nail this one shut real quick.
Sure.
And when I say real quick, I'm sure we could talk about this for another 6 hours. But this idea is really hard for people to grasp. But to put it on the very basic level, the God of the Old Testament especially, and even the God that's brought into the New Testament, which is claimed, at least by our current, edited version of the canon, is claimed to be the same God. So when it says, God says to Noah, I'm going to destroy everybody, Yahweh kills everybody, that's Jesus. Jesus kills everybody, apart from the people in the boat. When God says, Abraham, even though all the other people around here are killing their kids to their fake gods, I want you, as an example of how we're so different, I want you to kill your kid, and I want you to agree to it, because we want to be so different from everybody else. That's Jesus doing that, technically. When you look at, God, the people,
they're one and the same. Yeah,
one and the same. The people complain against God because they want food, bread and water, and God sends them snakes that will bite them. He says, if your children are disobedient long enough, stone them to death. If you see a guy picking up sticks on the Sabbath, stone them to death. If you see all kinds of bad stuff. If you go into a land where they're not your people, they're the Gentiles, you go in and you slaughter everyone. And if there's a virgin girl, you can keep her for yourself. If she had sex, if she had sex the night before because that was her wedding night, kill her. Kill that 13-year-old girl that had sex yesterday because she's not a virgin anymore. That's Jesus. And this idea that you add to it, I'll start with this Yahweh character. In addition to all the psychopathic stuff, a lot of Christians don't even realize where this guy came from. Like, he is
Yeah.
not who you think he was. He is the
Yeah.
son of a different God named El, or El Elyon, and
Yes.
he is one of many children. And there was a wife named Asherah that's been archaeologically proven. We don't know, when we grow up as Christians, the Yahweh character is not who we were taught he was.
Yeah.
And there's origins beyond that even. But you add this up, that you're adding all this gospel stuff to the story. And it's like, who even started it? And if you disassemble the Yahweh character, your jaw drops. You're like, this wasn't what I thought it was. So the whole gospel is predicated on the Bible, which is predicated on this Yahweh character, which people don't even know where it comes from. So you go back there, but then you're adding into it, this issue of the gospel is based on a foundation of blood magic, saying blood somehow cleanses us from sin, and sin's an issue itself, like whether or not that's a real thing. But where do Christians never get told where blood magic comes from? Did you uncover anything about that in your journey?
Once I left, more when I got into conversating with atheists more, I was seeing a lot of that. However, when I first left, we're not allowed to read books outside of our faith and stuff. You have to be careful because they have to protect all of these lies that we're told, even though, I believed with all my heart it was genuine. Most of us aren't around here trying to deceive other people, like genuinely, like that's not the focus. But we buy into these things that we're taught, don't read a non-Christian's book, that's just going to mess with your head. And we're afraid to take in information from the outside world. I should have been able to learn about science and then decide if it was right or wrong for myself. But I wasn't even allowed to let those things come into my mind because they would, steal me away from God. And same with these types of realizing that there are multiple religions that are all being borrowed in different ways and put in the Bible. It's like we just took that one God's name, but truly it was very many different religions are just all kind of like sprinkled throughout the scriptures. And how did I not realize that I'm drinking somebody's blood for my sins? And why did I think that was okay? How did I not see that as like blood magic and a very cultish thing? I'm obsessed with cult stories. I've always been, and I was in one and I didn't know. It's like, how do you miss that? But when you're indoctrinated, those things just become, that's normal. It's not normal if it's not our God, or if it's another God, it's not normal. But if it's ours, we just, we doctor it all up and make it pretty, drink from little wine sippies. And that's,
Yeah. Well, you on a similar note, I remember I wrote down one of your quotes from your other videos, where you were talking about seeing indoctrination in others and then seeing it in ourselves. And your quote was something like, if they're indoctrinated, maybe I'm indoctrinated. And then you said, oh, shoot. And it is, it's like you finally have, it's what, it's called, I believe, the outsider test for faith, where you'd say, okay, if I hear you say that someone rode a white horse up to the moon and that's that's your savior, that sounds weird. If your religion says you found golden plates buried in the earth, that sounds weird. If you're this, that, and you're like, everyone else is so weird in their religion. Everyone else has such wacky ideas. And especially, the really weird ones like Scientology, they're so crazy. They're out there, but not us. We're the ones that have and you're like, I used to believe in talking snakes, for crying out loud.
Yeah, that it was real, that a donkey could talk. Like that was a real thing that had to have happened because it was literally written in the Bible. So it had to have really happened. Yeah.
Well, I want to, there's 2 or 3 other Old Testament things I want to come back to in a minute, but I do want to ask, just to go back to your story. What we're talking about, a lot of these different issues that kind of came up later in deconversion, but in terms of just stepping back for 5 minutes here to your pre-deconversion, what was the good part of it? Like, what did it feel like when you were in it? Did you feel like you were actually talking to God? Did you feel like you had this sense of security?
Yeah, I felt like I heard God regularly.
Really?
Yeah, I was very prophetic in my in my spiritual gifting. So I was a natural teacher, often had wisdom beyond my years, or so it seemed. And those were things that I was taught and told about myself from the time I was very small. I think I really just had the passion, the courage to actually say things that other people were afraid to say. But I was labeled as very much like this special spiritual child from the time I was really young. So
what was it like when you heard God? Like what was actually happening there?
Okay, so kind of like how I always have a running dialogue in my mind. I typically have a very much a running dialogue. It's how I sort through my thoughts. Some people have more clarity of mind. I have kind of like a jumbled, chaotic mind, very busy, ADHD mind. And so for me, when things would just kind of stand out clearly, and I was asking God for answers, whatever kind of seemed like I would almost like look for signs and things from, outside perspective. And I guess that was just mostly my intuition trying to like pick things up and stuff and make something out of it. But because I think I would genuinely just kind of always have a dialogue going on, I was trying to decide what was God and what wasn't all the time. But it seemed, especially when it came to remembering scriptures and stuff, that God was almost always speaking to me. Trying to look back and define it now, it's a little harder. But at the time, I guess I would feel like impressions of things that felt like this is what God was sharing with me to share with you.
So it wasn't like you heard a voice.
It wasn't like an audible voice. It was, but I remember even telling other people, like, it's not like God has a specific voice we're all listening to. It's like the Holy Spirit is using our own voices to tell us things. Just a lot of internal dialogue, honestly, that I was labeling as God speaking to me because it felt profound. Anything that felt profound that wasn't like something that I just read, but maybe like a connection that I was making. And I'm extremely intuitive naturally. So I was always reading between the lines and, all that. There's like a lot of like voodoo-y things involved in Christian prophecy, even though we're not allowed to, participate or partake in things like tarot readings or mind readers and stuff, or telling the future. A lot of Christianity is all about that. Especially evangelical and spirit-filled Christianity, we do believe that God is still speaking to us today. And so those are the things that I would latch onto. I'm a very emotional person. So when you're trying to minister to somebody and you can just feel all of their feelings, because that's just the type of person that you are, that gives you an upper hand in trying to help them find out what's going on in their own lives. So because of my natural ability to just feel what people feel and be in those feelings with them, I was always just kind of getting what felt like direction from God to go and speak to people and to help heal them. And that's probably just one of my natural abilities, but spiritually speaking, it seemed to be something special.
And in the group, like the Pentecostal group, that's more of a commonplace part of their culture, right? So you're probably seeing it in other people too. Like I've got a
I was modeling after other leaders doing similar things.
Was it at all prophetic in the specific sense, like I really sense that something's going to happen to you in the next 48 hours, or like we see on a lot of people in the YouTube channels we're saying, I know that Trump is going to be the next president. Not 4 years from now he's going to be president. He's going to have 8 straight years, and I promise you, God's spoken it. It's as good as done. Was it like that, where it's specific and testable?
I think oftentimes I would be afraid to speak such specifics personally, but I would ruminate on them if I felt like God was impressing something like that on me. I would basically kind of it was one of those things, if somebody else confirmed it or somebody else said it, or I had an inkling about it and then someone else said it, it seemed to be then it was like, okay, then this is God, because we're both feeling these same things, or 3 of us are feeling these same things. So then those things would get spoken out. A lot of times though, it was just about the direction of the church. Where's the church going? What's the vision for our body? How are we going to bring salvation to the whole world? This vehicle of Christianity and our specific church. What are we going to be doing about that? But a lot of what I did was very personal, helping with people and healing, trying to
One-on-one
help them
conversations.
unburden themselves. Yeah, it very much like personal healing conversations. But because I sang on the praise team in the main church, even though I was a worship leader in youth, there were often times like prophetic song would take off. And I mean, you know how music moves you, man. Like that's one of my things about church that is still disturbing to me. You know, you're watching an ad and they play like this soft music in the background, and suddenly you're emotionally just super connected to whatever they're telling you. And unfortunately, that's what happens in church settings when, you know, we play the emotionally triggering music in the background. Now, suddenly we're in tears and we think God's moving, but really, maybe the music just got to us a little bit. And I like am recognizing like the power of music after I left church, even though I knew in church because of all of the videos my dad would make me watch, Hell's Bells, and you know how the devil was in all this bad music. So I knew music was powerful, but I never saw it as a manipulation tool in church, even though, come to think of it, we pretty much planned our services around how we can manipulate people with the music, you know, how we can get them to come to the altar and confess their feelings. You know, as soon as the pastor would start to get real passionate about what he's saying, the pianist would be up there doing their thing to try to drive us all as a herd to the altar where we can experience something. And being a charismatic person, I fit right into that whole scene. I was the girl, you know, running around the church, spirit-filled, speaking in tongues, and then singing songs of prophecy. I remember singing like God, like giving me the words, which is basically just my poetic nature, singing things over the congregation while the piano played in the background. I mean, but it was very moving because I'm a passionate person. So these things, now that I look back on them, I can see the manipulative nature of it, even though that wasn't my heart. But, you know, there's, you know, so much enthusiasm and passion goes into things that ends up being the result is people come to God because you made them feel something.
And this may be a corollary to that too. I would just add is the idea of we're preying on the needy, and that is not like a subset. That's all of us. I'm being generic there, but I mean, which of us hasn't had, you know, a romantic heartbreak? Which of us doesn't have unfulfilled desires?
Yeah.
Which one of us hasn't had some medical setback? And it's like you add it all together, and certainly just the generic life confusion of, you know, I've made bad choices or someone else had bad choices that affected me. It's like we've all got stuff that's weighing us down exponentially, and some of us much more than others. But like when you give someone this message of, hey, God's at work behind the scenes. He's going to bring it all. Someday he's going to take all the pain, and he's going to take all the years that the locusts have eaten, and he's going to turn it to something good. He's going to bless you. It's, you know, you're going to be you're favored, and you're chosen and highly favored before God, or whatever that verbiage is. And especially for me, I remember my last big church here was a church here in Atlanta called Perimeter Church, which is a very big Presbyterian church, which I don't know if Presbyterian churches are usually mega churches, but it's one of them. And it just that's the songs that would come on sometimes talking about some aspect of God is in control, and he is going to, in the end, make everything right. And there's something about us that just feels so needy for someone to say, I need answers, therefore Jesus. And obviously, the more you learn about the Jesus character, you realize, you know, this is crazy. But until you learn all that information, where you're just assuming that everything you've been taught about him is fairly correct, you're just like, yes, this is the most important thing in the world, is to realize that this is not like, my life isn't just a series of random events. It's a story that's part of a big story, and I'm part of that big story. And if I could just get my mind off my little today to the story he's writing with me, and from my little story that he's writing with my whole life to the story he's writing across history, I'll be like, oh God, thank you. I feel so much peace and joy now. And that, when you're needy, oh, does that hit the spot? Oh, does that hit the spot?
Yeah, I was raised in poverty, so church community was all we had. You know, our Christmas gifts came from the angel tree. Like, we didn't have, you know, anything. My dad was a very kind, giving man, a fantastic auto mechanic, but he was so impulsive. He was always like leaving jobs and stuff. And our financial stability was just never a thing. And yeah, we needed the church very much just to keep our heads above water. That community is probably the hardest thing about leaving church for me. Is it's hard to rebuild or to build or to find community again, because when you're in a group of people that all believe in and have the similar take on the world and life, you're all unified under this one purpose. And finding community outside of religion in a very Christian world, even like I said, people have trouble like getting rid of the label, even if they don't follow Christianity. They're still not like, they're not ready to throw the label away by any means. So it's like finding a place to plug in where you don't believe in God is hard. And you miss that. Like, I wish my kids had a group of people that we always hung out with and a big place to go where we all talked about life, because that's what church was for me. It was like a life source, right? And so you get rid of all of that, and it's like crickets when it comes to community. Like, where is everybody? There's got to be people on this path with me, right? Because it was so easy to find that in church. Church offers you a family. It's like you have this great big extended. I remember when I had my first son, his birthday party, I had it at the church. I invited at least 120 people to that. You know what I mean? Like, there was just always, my baby showers were huge just because I had so many church friends. And when you're in poverty, you don't have a whole lot in life. It's like, this was the answer. God's answer for us was to be plugged into this church and to get the help that we needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And across the board, it really does. It's very, very hard to disconnect from that, both in terms of the physical ways that people can get physical assistance, but also just the emotional and the connection.
Yeah.
And I think it's a lot of people really do struggle with deconverting because of those issues. And others, it's even more intense, where they're maybe the pastor themselves, where it's like, this is, if I deconvert, where is my paycheck coming from? And those are really tough situations. But
oh yeah.
I've not met too many people that have gone through that, but I've met a couple, and it's not a fun spot. Well, I wanted to ask a couple more questions, and I want to go back to your story too in a minute. But one of the highlights that a lot of churches, or a lot of people that deconvert, they tend to go back to, and I want to ask if this was true for you, is the a couple ways I could put it: the purity culture and the shame culture.
I just want to like flip the camera off when you say purity culture, but go ahead. It makes me feel bad.
For anyone that, could you give them maybe a 20-second description of what that is for anyone that doesn't like what's purity culture? I think most people know, but I'm sure some might be a new concept. But what does that look like, and what did it look like for you? What were the expectations, and what kind of impact either did you see it having on you, or at least in your friends and the culture around you?
Because I was raised in faith, and I mean, all the books were coming out. Josh Harris's I Kissed Dating Goodbye and all that stuff was like really big. I remember being told, even as like an adult young woman, like, because I'm so charismatic, that I needed to dress differently because I was on stage, and I wouldn't want to be like tempting the men with my whole 120 pounds of figure that really wasn't. But it was just something that, like, everything was being critiqued about, being tempting, and I was just being my fun-loving self. I didn't even think about it as sexual at all. But we were like jumping on stage and stuff, and this was just like this. I was one of the people told, like, essentially to just like tone it down because I can be distracting to men just by being a pretty person on the stage. I'm like, this is ridiculous. But I remember at the time being like very hurt by it, because that wasn't my heart or my intention. Like, can't God find some way to protect these men? I'm just being myself, I'm not doing anything sexual. And then growing up, though, I was saving my first kiss for marriage. I remember very specifically committing to that. There was a lot of promise rings going around, and purity ceremonies in the church, obviously being under my father's headship. So I was dating a guy kind of. My dad never really approved people that I dated. It was very rare. I always had to get approval from my dad. I really wasn't allowed to date. And then every once in a while he would let me. So I was this like 17-year-old girl who just wasn't even allowed to date for the most part. We had someone that I grew up with that was like my childhood and high school sweetheart, but it was always very innocent. And then some guy ended up like kissing me when I was 17, and because I didn't get to have the conversation with him about my purity stance. And he was a Christian, but he wasn't like a spirit-filled Christian like I was. And so when my dad hadn't even given us permission to date yet. And I remember that like just crushing my world, because I didn't want to make him feel rejected or to hurt him, but I had serious plans for my first kiss. That was marriage to me. And when I just kind of, I asked the Lord to forgive me, because it really wasn't anything that was in my control. And I didn't want to be like rude and just shove the guy away. It was a very confusing time for me, because I truly was committed to my purity. And then my high school childhood sweetheart kind of broke my heart. And so I started dating the guy that I ended up marrying. And I was already 18. I had turned 19 shortly after we started talking to each other. We were only dated for 14 months, and then we ran off and got married, because, it's better to marry than to burn. And I was saving my virginity for marriage. So, oh my God, it was horrible too, because we were leaders in the church. And I remember going to our youth pastor, because we were the youth pastor's right-hand couple, We were his, prodigy who he was raising up to take his place one day. And so I went to him with an open heart, because I was a very transparent person. And I said, we're really struggling with our purity. We really want to stay purer than we are. We kind of spent a lot of time alone, because I was driving and picking him up. So we were in the car alone a lot. We would try to utilize things like chaperones and stuff, but it just wasn't always convenient or possible. And I was trying to get accountability from my youth pastor by expressing that we were struggling and kind of crossing some intimate boundaries, because that's how I would talk back then. And, he just said he was trying to hold us accountable by, kind of having us check in with him when we were alone and stuff. And just having that open dialogue was accountability in and of itself. Well, then my dad flipped out when he found out that we were crossing boundaries, and he didn't want us to date at all. He shut it down. I was 19 at this time, almost 20, and my dad would not allow me to date the man that I was in love with and planning on marrying. It was heartbreaking, and it destroyed our world. We were asked to step down from all of our ministries for our impurity. We never even had sex. Like, this was just me being way overly honest about our struggles with, not making out too long and those types of things, right? We were asked to step down from our ministries. He was the pianist and played the bass and Sunday mornings, like in the church. Like, he was a very quiet, introverted man, but he had just a musical gift. And, I was helping lead worship at that point in the big congregation and in the choir, and we were stripped of all of our ministries. I was no longer allowed to be a youth leader. It is still devastating to remember how alone I felt during that time, because other people were having sex. They just weren't telling anybody. And I was being authentic and transparent, and I had the big A slapped on me so that everybody could see. And you know what? All the teenagers that were so open and honest with me, they shut down during that time, and they stopped confessing what they were going through. It really was a horrible thing for the church to do to us, because now it stopped other people from growing, because now they're afraid to share their stories, because Summer is actually a really awesome girl who just wants, to remain pure and is trying to do that with everything in her. And now the whole church knows that she's not perfect. And it was like, and then Johnny and we ran off and got married. I literally like 3 weeks later after all of that happened, because my dad had this, he asked God, and God told him that I was going to marry a man named Johnny. Actually, I don't know, how that happened, but that was before I even met Johnny, which was weird. So he felt like he had to let me marry him, even though he didn't want me to, but he was trying to find like a loophole around it. It was a weird, even makes me uncomfortable kind of like describing it that way, but didn't want me to be with him, was trying to find like an out on it. And then I just couldn't handle it anymore because, first of all, I didn't want to live at home anymore. The control, all of it was getting too much for me. I wasn't even allowed to, I moved in with my cousin to help her because her husband was in the military and was overseas, and she had a 1-year-old. And I was working, I was trying to help her. And then my dad was just like, no, you need to come back home because he's the head and I have to obey him. And I couldn't wait to get married. Let's just put it that way. I needed to get out of there. We didn't have a dime to our names. We were both working minimum wage. I remember the first place we rented was like $400 a month, this little tiny shack in town. And God, the freedom of just getting out from underneath my father's thumb. And there was so much that went into that healing in the church where, the pastor essentially like asked us to forgive him for the way that he handled the situation. Like it ended up being a really unfortunate thing that the church did to us, because they wanted to force us to get an annulment. I mean, it got ugly. It got ugly before it got good, but that is purity culture. And that's how I experienced it, was you get married before you burn, and then you end up divorced 10 years later. So that was our story in a nutshell. It was horrible and it was very traumatizing. And honestly, I don't know how I stuck it out, because other than just feeling like God had something to teach me through it all. He was teaching the church something about the way they handle their people. Even, I just felt like I was just a tool for him to teach other people something, because I was abused and didn't need to be.
It's heartbreaking to hear that. I mean, it really, when you step back from it, a couple reflections real quick, because I know we have a lot of other things we want to talk about, but
Yeah.
just to kind of like summarize some of that and add a few thoughts. There's this sense of shame that so many people have, whether it's shame like where someone took your very good intentions in your case to try to be pure and just misunderstood it, misrepresented it, where it's like it's a shame that really isn't deserved. There's other people that kind of do in that sense. If you're in that mentality, that worldview, you do deserve shame because you really did do some things that broke the rules. Certainly for guys, and I'm sure for girls too, there's the sense of shame of just what you're thinking about, whether there's people that are, the pastor, the head pastor of a church, that are doing way more in their mind than everyone else would ever, dream of doing in real life. Just the shame of the guilt and the desires, but also just you touch on really like the dehumanizing part of this. Like yes, there is a wisdom sense of saying, don't just go sleep with a bunch of people. Sure, there's some wisdom there. You don't need Christ to know that, but there's some wisdom there to not just sleep with anybody and not have the to be in danger of creating a family without the shelter of a commitment. There's wisdom there. Again, Bible doesn't need to be a part of to know that, but there's like this sense of, like, apart from something like that, of just helping, stuff you talk through with your kids, like how to be wise in your decisions. But there's this sense of like, you're not allowed to ever really be human. Like I thought about this a lot, even before I deconverted. Like we're so quick to say, don't think about this, don't lust for that, don't do this, don't cross that line. And again, even when I was a Christian, I was thinking, at what point do you just celebrate who you are? Like, why don't we like say 100 times first, it's awesome the way you're created, it's awesome the desires you have, it's awesome the desire for intimacy or even for eroticism. They're beautiful things. But add those caveats, but it's like a it's like a loaded gun, in the hand of a very good policeman that wants to do the right thing. It's a very important tool, but in the wrong hands, it's an awful thing, and a lot of bad things happen. But like, before you say the caveats, like, celebrate it first. Like, it's such a good thing to have this beautiful, and from a theistic perspective, to be made by God with all these desires. Like, I was thinking, the fact that guys desire sex so much. You're thinking, okay, like, what is it, like 50,000 sperm an hour or something? It's some astronomical number. I don't remember what it is, but it's like a huge amount of sperm that get created in the man's body per hour. And it's like, it's when you see the number, it's like, whoa, that's crazy. but you're like, that's God that did that. That's God that did that. God made you to have those desires. And then to have to step back and say, but I should be so ashamed of myself. And
Mhm.
I often felt the empathy for girls too, especially girls that maybe, had more curves, where it's like there's just this innate, like, I need to kind of keep myself
Yeah.
from being such a stumbling block. And
Yeah. I
it's
was
like,
I was told I walked too sexual.
yeah,
I'm like, look, I can't help that I like ooze sexuality. Like, it's not something I can change about myself. It wasn't an intention.
yeah,
It wasn't intending to do that. So it always felt like an attack on me, like I was doing something wrong without even trying to, just by being a woman was wrong.
yeah,
If you had a slender figure or your chest wasn't as pronounced, or you were more of a tomboy, it was like, okay. But if I dressed my curves and wore my high heels and sashayed a little bit, I was clearly trying to deter men from their wives, and in turn disrespecting my future husband. And it's like, I was just literally just growing up,
yeah.
That's all it was.
And you add that to the whole picture, that like the long-term picture of marriage, and you tell people you should be ashamed, you should be embarrassed, you should be, much more, I don't know what the word is, but much less sexual in any sense you can. And then you go to
Conservative,
marriage, conservative,
yeah,
and modest,
modest.
and then you flip it in marriage. And a lot of people, some people can do it, but you hear a lot of stories
No,
where
it's
people can't do it, where they're
big
like,
mental block for women.
yeah,
Yes.
they get into marriage and they hate it. They hate sex because
Yeah.
they're always told, cover up, don't get seen, don't enjoy it. And all of a sudden it's like you're supposed to be a, what's the expression? I forget it, but you're supposed to be a lady in public and a whore in bed. And it's like, you can't do it. You cannot do it. And it just falls apart. And people, and obviously expectations play into that, but it does. People end up divorced 10 years later, and
And
sex is a part of it.
there's no understanding of what your two sexual what your differences are as a couple, because you never get to explore that in any capacity. And it's always heightened, especially as teenagers. So being a teenager, essentially going into a marriage, before I even turned 20, luckily we were very well sexually matched. But I have so many friends, Christian women, who ended up in marriages where they could not get past the mental blocks of trying to be prudent while also being sexual with their husband. It was like they had to turn off their sexuality and then know exactly when to turn it on. Plus being a mother, you throw all of that into it, and it's like they were never allowed to embrace their curves or their body. And then now it's all being changed by having babies. And then they already hate themselves. I was taught to not like my body as a woman because it was distracting to men. Luckily, I didn't buy a whole lot of that, and I really did embrace my sexuality somehow. I think that because my husband and I were well matched sexually, I didn't have a lot of the struggles that a lot of other women did. And I just got married right away instead of pushing those sexual desires down so hard. But so many women that really bought into the purity aspect of relationship, or maybe they were got saved after they had already had sex before and multiple partners, and then so they brought all of this baggage, as we would call it, into their marriage. All of the other people that they had slept with now become a hindrance or a burden, because now they've been told all of those things were so wrong, even though it happened before they even knew who God was. So unfortunately, it really is a big problem that affects intimacy in marriages. And I feel like especially with women, we don't know when we're allowed to embrace our bodies and when we're not, and having to flip the switch on and off depending on whose company you're in it's hard. It was a hard thing to figure out. Am I being too flirtatious by smiling in a conversation because my chest is large? Like, that sucks. I was always trying to protect the men around me, and it was like horrible, just horrible.
Yeah, it adds up
Yeah.
to a lot for both men and women, where you just really don't ever get to just celebrate who you are.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the biggest things that I've thought through, and it both a little bit before deconversion, but certainly after, is just realizing, finding your identity again and saying, I'm an awesome person. And the shame culture, just like the God behind it, there's never real. Like, there is no such thing as Yahweh. There is no such thing as Jesus. There's no such thing as shame. There's no such thing as sin. Like, you're not a sinner. And, if a guy is looking at someone that's beautiful and just saying, wow, she's amazing, what a beautiful woman, there's no sin in that. There's nothing, not a hint. I mean, not even a hint. It's not like, well, if you don't look twice, if you do it the right way, like, no, like under any circumstances, it's not wrong to appreciate the beauty of another human, and to even, have a desire for passion. And it's like that, to just re-embrace humanity is so big a deal. We probably should move on to the next topic, but I was going to say that could be another whole discussion.
Yeah. It reminds me though about how after leaving faith and getting a divorce and stuff, I really did embrace more of a polyamorous mindset about love and connection, because it was always so hard to turn off feeling like I'm intimately connecting with somebody in conversation. And I'm in a monogamous marriage, but my husband does, celebrate that about me. He doesn't get upset if we both find another woman attractive, or if I mention that a man is attractive. There's a lot of security there. And so with jealousy being just such a normal part of marriages and relationships, it's something that has always rubbed me the wrong way. And I have never been a particularly jealous person in like sexual ways. I can be jealous of time and stuff and feel insecure for sure. But when it came to a God being like a jealous God and stuff like that, those were always attributes that I found very unusual for a spirit being rather than like a human being. Because if I could not be jealous, why in the world is God like a jealous God? It always just didn't feel right to label him that way, because I found myself just wanting to express and connect my heart with other people. It was always hard to figure out, like, I'm not allowed to be friends with a man. That's so weird, but we have so much in common. We have really good conversations, but I was expected to turn off anything that even connecting on that kind of a level, because there was always like a sexual temptation that could screw everything up or whatever. Yeah. And very different.
It would be a bigger discussion someday, but just the idea even of being open to realizing that sexuality, as we've had it so clearly defined for us in the church, it really, it's like you have to realize as a Christian who deconverts, as a former Christian, once you deconvert, that like you have to redefine everything about reality, and you're starting afresh. And this, again, this could be a whole big topic, and I don't want to turn into a focus of this, but polyamory is a big topic, and yet if you're going to come up with the premise of this Yahweh character is not real, which he isn't, and the Bible is talking about a worldview that is pretend, which it is, then that means that this whole system of, it has to be this way and that way. I mean, disregarding the fact that, David had many wives and Solomon had many wives and all that. But if you close your eyes to that for a minute, like there is no reason to believe that the way that we all do it currently is the best way that it should be done. And it's not just about that topic. That's a really good one, because it's like everyone's like, what do you mean polyamory? Like that's a, even as I think even atheists sometimes would probably balk at, like, what do you mean? But it's a good example of a topic that would be like, this is the point. It isn't about polyamory. It's about the fact that we are not going to let a theistic worldview that was created thousands of years ago by people that pretended to have visions of several levels of heaven, that believed that men were really important and heard visions from God and women never did, and that men controlled the church and the patriarchy and all that, and that that they could kill people and and take their land and steal their land. This tribalistic, genocidal people that did this and tried to blame it on God, that somehow their version of reality that got very strongly pushed in our direction, and we inherited a lot of it, that somehow we're obligated to believe that that's the best way to live. Like, that's not true. And it takes a while for that to hit. Like, it's like waves of deconversion to say, it's not just about there's no God. It's not just about that Jesus is made up. It's about the reality that it's a whole system that's been thrust upon you, and it's like you have to just like it's like it never really ends. You have to keep on deconstructing and say, what other parts of life has this taught me that have nothing to do with reality, nothing whatsoever to do with it. And it's really helpful to have some of the power topics like that hit you like that, like, oh yeah, I really do need to think through it. And you know,
Yeah.
it's just,
Yeah,
it's not like
there may be another way to do this. Like, oh yeah, okay, maybe that was more of a Christian construct rather than you know, the only way to create or start a family. Maybe there's other ways to do it.
Yeah.
I think our history suggests that it's been done other ways before. So
Yeah, exactly. Well, I do want to ask, in terms of getting to your actual deconversion.
Yeah.
We've talked about you got baptized, you know, grew up in the church, you got
Yep.
baptized at 11, you became
Mhm.
very faithful and committed to the Lord, you got involved in ministry,
Yes.
you got to a point where you were kind of temporarily ostracized, but you tried to do the right thing and pursue the marriage.
Yes.
At that point, you're still a Christian, it sounds like.
Mhm.
Take us over the edge. What happens between that time frame and when you deconverted? What started to enter the picture that changed it from Jesus is my Lord and Savior to something's wrong?
So the very first thing that I was studying was tithe.
Tithe?
Yeah. So I started to look at the Old Testament and the New Testament because I didn't like the Old Testament God. I'm like, what's wrong with this dude? He's like mean and angry. And so I really started to look at, you know, the covenants. The New Testament means new covenant. Old Testament means old covenant. Okay, so this is just the way that we're like viewing God, right? Maybe this is man's description of God and our relationship with him over the years. Maybe it's, you know, what we think God looks like or whatever. Because that was the only way I could explain the Old Testament God, who God doesn't change, right? He's the same as he's always been, right? So it was like, why did he appear so different in the Old Testament than the New Testament? So I was doing like this deep dive of Old Testament things that we were cherry picking and using in the New Testament. And one of those things was tithe. And I tried to talk to all the leadership about it, right? I was posting about it regularly on my social media. I was asking questions. I was reading books by Frank Viola about deconstructing the church. And what was the big one? One of the big ones, Pagan Christianity. I don't know if you're familiar with that book.
No.
It really highlighted all of the things. It's kind of one of those things that a lot of people in the church would probably find as a little bit of a dangerous book because he's really, you know, shaking up things like tithe. So I was already studying tithe. Then I come across this book, and that's one of the ways I came across it was because I was looking for more answers. So I found out about the Levitical priesthood, how we really should not be applying tithe as a 10% of our income. I was so sick of people getting up on the stage and saying things like, you need to cut the head off of the serpent or your money is going to be cursed, because I grew up in poverty. And I remember my parents giving 10% even when we couldn't pay our light bill. And it was one of those things where I was like, the church has to keep supporting us because we're paying our tithe. It doesn't make sense to me, but I believed that God was doing what he needed to do and everybody was learning from it. However, when I actually studied tithe myself and understood that it was for a different people, it wasn't even for our church today. And I needed to talk to leadership about that because I was a part of leadership, but I had kind of faded a little bit because I had both of my boys and it was much harder to participate actively as a leader. So I was singing sometimes, but not all the time because I had just had my second child and they were only a year apart. And so my husband was more involved in ministry at this point than I was, but I was really starting. It was 2014, I remember, because I was like devouring these books and I just needed leadership to actually have conversations with me about it. And that put a really bad taste in my mouth, that I was just essentially being told, you know, you need to shut this down. This is not good information, but no one would actually like go through the information with me. They were just, you know, I could feel that I was stepping on our toes now. Now I was talking about their money, and that's a big problem. That's a no-no. So I was questioning if we should be teaching these things. Shouldn't we be teaching that we should support the church, but shouldn't we be using our faith that people are going to give as the Lord directs them rather than telling them that there's a law that there isn't? Like, why are we using that? Don't you think that it's like when you go and you eat at a restaurant and they charge you a percentage if you're above 6 people that you have to pay, but you were going to give a $30 tip and now it's only a $15 tip. And I remember thinking, like, if we trusted God on this, he would actually expand our church and probably expand the giving of the people, because they would be free to give whatever he directed them to. If we would remove this curse talk and actually free our people to give, it would be better. So my message wasn't like, you're bad or wrong for teaching this. It was like, there's a better way, which was usually how I address things. But I was shut down real hard when it came to talking about tithe. And then I remember just kind of like sitting back with it, like, they don't value me. They don't value my voice in the church. This sucks. And I don't know that I have a platform anymore. I could feel it just slipping away. And then I was doing my Old Testament, New Testament comparison studies and finding out, it started to unravel when I thought, if this is just the way men see God, and we've, taken note of it over the years and developed the Bible, then maybe the Bible's not inerrant, and it's just our story of trying to find out who God is. And that basically just rocked my world and changed everything. Everything slowly unraveled from that point. I don't think that my faith was necessarily lost yet. I just didn't believe the Bible was perfect anymore. So I wasn't taking it literally, which opened my mind to the potential of science being actually having like a place in my heart and in my life. That slowly opened the door to researching. The next big one was Rob Bell's book, Love Wins, because as soon as I removed hell from the equation, that was like it. Because now, I don't owe you my money and no one's actually going to hell. Now we're just serving God if we want to, because it's the right thing to do and he's going to bless us for it. So then once you remove the fear from relationship with God, there's no control anymore, because fear is what we were controlled by. And even though I said I was very secure in my salvation, I wasn't really afraid of hell. Once I started speaking out about hell not being real, then I really got ostracized from the church and I lost my platform completely. I couldn't wait to free people from this. They're riddled with fear and they think they're going to hell if they make a mistake, but God just loves them. I would always say the scripture, perfect love casts out all fear. And so it really bothered me that we used scare tactics like, if you don't tithe, God's going to curse you. I was like, God's not out cursing people. And he's not. And then I found out he's not even sending us to hell, that we constructed this place when all of the actual words that are used don't even describe a physical hell. It was like, that's not even, and Rob Bell doesn't ever say that hell doesn't exist, but he raises the question and gives you all of the tools to decide that for yourself or not. And I definitely came to the conclusion that it just wasn't real. And that essentially just did it for me. And it was like, once my faith was, it's interesting with faith, because as faithful as I was and as sure as I was, when this started to happen and I slowly started to break down these things that I didn't believe to be truths anymore, my faith just it didn't go away overnight, but it just slowly faded out. And then I remember wanting to come back. I remember feeling like there's still not enough other answers for me. I need to fill in these gaps. This is uncomfortable. I don't like being in this transition phase. And I wanted my faith back. I remember trying to pray and then just recognizing that, once faith is gone, once you've seen the light, you can't unsee it. There was no going back for me at that point. And I accepted that I was in the least agnostic. So from 2014 to about, 2000 and it was about 7 years. 7 years of deconversion from the beginning to the end. And a lot of that was just not really going to church for a few years, but still living very morally, wrestling with it in my heart. And just feeling kind of lost. My husband and I got divorced, so there was a lot of just lack of stability during that time anyways, even though I was transitioning. And a lot of people thought I was just leaving the church because I was upset and I was getting a divorce and stuff. But it really, I studied my way out of faith fully. It was all about the scriptures and what I found and didn't find.
I gotta say, I love hearing stories like that. It just, that's what it's all about. I mean, this is where the rubber hits the road. Is you did the hard work, you did the digging, but you mixed it with the right questions and the right ability to discern it, because so much of the issues that we face, and from my experience in these conversations with Christians and with other religions, is they can't open up their minds enough to imagine that there's another explanation for almost anything. I mean, especially the Bible. Especially Christianity, it's like you could see it as there's different possibilities. One of them is that there is a God, and he has a son named Jesus, and Jesus is your savior, and there really is a heaven, and he wants you to go there, and there's a way to get there. That whole story in the gospel is very much their possibility, and that's what they cling to, and that's what that's the party line you're given as a Christian. But to open your mind up as you did to the idea that maybe this took several different human routes, and some people do admittedly end up more in a liberal Christian version where, like, yeah, God used people, he used the genocide even though he didn't really want it to happen. He worked with the cultural limitations, they were genocidal.
I hung out there for a little while. I was just very liberal Christian for a while, for a couple of years.
Yeah, and some people feel comfortable there, some people never leave that. They're just like, Christianity is real in some sense to them, but they'll say, there's issues with the Bible. But for those of us, I think, especially who grew up where it was like the more literal side, I'm not saying it's right to do this dissection, but it felt like it was put so clearly, like, this is the truth of all truths. It's absolutely rock solid. And for someone to show you categorically that it's not what you thought it was, and there's big errors in it and big issues, it just crumbles altogether.
Yeah.
And kudos to people that feel like they're comfortable in liberal Christianity. I still have issues with that, but the piece that's missing for me is that so many people don't have this scope for the imagination, as Anna Green Gables would say, scope for the imagination to just imagine maybe this really did just happen as a result of men that made this decision and that decision and that decision, that edited this book and that book, threw a bunch out. And when you really look back at church history, you look back at early church history, you look back at the first couple hundred years CE, you look back at the last couple hundred years before Christ, and you put those pieces in place for real, and especially if you go back to Yahweh, but even without that, you can see very clearly how this could have happened. I mean, it is not hard to imagine that this could have easily happened by a bunch of people who were, especially in Second Temple Judaism, that were messianic, apocalyptic. They believed strongly, especially the Essenes, which, or the people that wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, which, by the way, spoiler, the Dead Sea Scrolls are all over the New Testament if you haven't done it. Just look it up. Yeah. It's really important, people. The Dead Sea Scrolls are quoted in the New Testament all over the place. These people that wrote the New Testament, they believed in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They read them, they incorporated them, and they believed that there were angels coming back at any minute to fight a war against all the wickedness of the Romans, the wickedness of the wrong temple practices, and that they were going to wipe out the sons of darkness. They were called the children of light. The children of light were going to wipe out the sons of darkness, and they were going to basically reinstate, the Torah observance and Judaism, this whole thing is basically what they expected, and it didn't happen. It didn't work out. They got slaughtered. Spoiler alert: they got slaughtered, and it didn't work out. And the Dead Sea Scrolls sat there for 2,000 years. And in the end result, you got people scattered all over saying, "What in the world do we do now? Our temple's gone. Our supposed Messiah that was going to come is gone. The angels didn't come like we knew they were going to come. What do we do now? Our family's gotten slaughtered. What's left for us?" And they come up with a version of a religion that borrows exponentially from Mithraism, from other Greco-Roman mystery cults. I mean, other people were for hundreds of years saying, you need to be baptized into your Savior. into his death and resurrection, to inherit his benefit, you need to have a communal meal with your people to become part of the community. Just like us as Christians, you inherit all this stuff. The blood magic was already firmly established from Judaism, the scapegoating from Judaism. It's all the pieces are there, and you end up with this story that easily could have happened. And there's absolutely nothing about this that is divine, or that couldn't have happened by just the way the chips fell. And you end up with this Christianity that just, and it gets hyper edited throughout the next couple hundred years, and until like Constantine and all that, and the Council of Nicaea. But eventually you get to a point where it's like, what is left of this that looks divine? There's nothing in it that looks divine at all. Absolutely nothing.
I remember believing, being told that Christianity was the oldest religion. And throughout this course of research, as my faith started to break down, I remember being like, well, let me find out, okay, what was the next religion? What did other religions borrow from us then? Because I started to see that a lot of religions had very similar structures. The same story was told over and over again, just with a couple different characters here and there. And I thought, why, I was always told like other religions were just mimicking our faith, right? And so when I looked at it, I was like, well, hold up. Nope. No, there were plenty of religions before ours. Actually, we borrowed those stories. And without like knowing very specific details to share, that is one thing that I would tell Christians to delve into. Find out what our actual history is, where we came from, how our Bible was put together. Those types of things, if you don't know that about your own faith, you need to know, because those are the things that will determine if this is real for you or not. And it's pretty screwed up. It's not what we've been told. It's not what we've been sold. It's a whole bunch of, it's almost like Chinese telephone, like stories get passed along and then it all kind of gets intermixed. And before you know it, you've got a bunch of astrology in the Bible and all kinds of other things, lots of numerology in the Bible. There are as you put it, it's not divine. It's not it's a historical book that's interesting. It's not, history as in we can take every word that was said, obviously, but these were things that were, shared in stories told from long ago. And in and of that, it's kind of neat to read it. But if you're applying this to your life and living by it, it's really a bunch of hogwash. It's not something you build your life around, and it has no power.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just,
that's a really good point. It has no power.
It has no power. As soon as the fear was taken away from me that other people were going to hell, and I stopped feeling a need to evangelize all the time to save everybody. Oh man, there's just the weight of the world was lifted off my shoulders. I could see people. For who they were. They weren't projects anymore. It's so sad to me that I spent so much of my life treating people like they were projects of salvation or growth. Like I had all this work to do. And now all I want to do is just watch people live their lives and be the beautiful people that they are, and whatever makes them happy and brings them joy. It's awesome when you just see like a free person just living life. It's the most beautiful thing.
Yeah. And when you're a Christian, it's like every conversation ideally has to come back to the gospel at some point, as opposed to just like, what can I learn from you? What's going on in your life? It's like, no, I'll listen to your stories and your anecdotes just long enough to kind of turn this to, so let's what do you think about Jesus? Where are you with God? And it's like,
really, I'm just listening for the doorway to share with you Christ, because I'm looking for all of your broken parts so that I can help you heal. And the only, so I'll listen to you talk, but really what I'm doing is I'm waiting for the opportunity to sell you my God, because you need him. I need him. You need him. So it becomes this, it's less about living together and all about, just smacking the salvation label on and then moving along. It's, Yeah.
And it's, I think to go back a step or two, one of my biggest passions and slash pet peeves is just the lack of this information being given to people. Even something as simple as, and this is like old news, but for those of us that, you know, were in Christianity, it was new news to me. But like learning that the Gospel of Mark is structured according to the signs of the zodiac in the right order. That's
Yes.
information that like that changes things, or that the Luke and Acts are based on rewrites of the Iliad and the Odyssey, and that
Yes.
the Bacchae is written into several of the stories of the Gospels. Like just knowing that makes a big difference. Knowing that the book of Enoch is quoted 100 times in the New Testament, like just, it doesn't mean you have to deconvert. It doesn't mean you can't be any Christian, the same Christian or liberal Christian or whatever. But just like, I'm like, give me
At
the
least
information.
know.
Yeah, put it
Yeah.
on the table and I'll make my own decision. Don't give me like 1% of the whole story and then be like, oh, well, when you went to college and you found out there's more to the story through science or through whatever, through religious comparing religions or whatever, like, oh, you went to college and you deconverted, how liberal these awful colleges are. It's like, no, you gave me 1% and you didn't tell me hardly anything about canonicity, about the original story of the early Gospels, the extra Gospels, the other 40, 50 Gospels that are there. You didn't tell me about Second Temple Judaism, what was happening. You didn't tell me we look just like Zoroastrianism and Mithraism in many ways. You didn't tell me there's like at least 7 or 8 other dying and rising gods that we copied a lot of stuff from. Like, just put it on the table without any preconceived things. I mean, yeah, Christians are always going to spin it. Everyone spins stuff. But like, yeah, put your spin, but put all of it on the table. I'll make up my own mind. And it's like a fairness issue. Like, it's not fair to people to say, give your whole life to this thing, and I'm not going to tell you hardly anything about where it came from. But the ironic thing is, you think you know where it came from, but you don't.
Yeah, or scaring people that their faith is in jeopardy if they try to learn these things or understand these things.
Yeah.
As if, the devil is in our history, just trying to take our, established faith from us. It's terrible. Another thing that deconstructed the Bible as far as being inerrant for me also was just the comparison of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I could very clearly see that God allowed us our own kind of like perspective. These were 4 different men's perspective of similar things that were happening. And oftentimes they would quote different numbers for things that were going on and stuff. So they weren't always seeing it. And I always thought, like, God, wouldn't you make sure all those details were in line if the Bible is inerrant, right? When we have each story should totally like complement the other one. And when I recognized that even though the characteristics of the disciples were being shown in the way they told their stories, they weren't perfectly accurate, which in my mind was like, well, God at least allows in the Bible our perspective to be off, and I remember like being like, that's just being human though. And then being like, but isn't the Bible can't be messed up by human beings, right? Isn't that the whole inerrancy thing? And when you actually compare the scriptures and you see that there's quite a few contradictions. I also had a friend, my best friend at the time, who eventually just defriended me. And I think it was because of my departure from faith. And I think there's a little guilt there too, because a lot of the things that I was studying and researching about the problems in the scriptures were because she was in theology school at the time. So she was bringing me all of her juicy information and we were doing a lot of research together. And yeah, I mean, even though she was staying in school and being able to like work her way through that stuff, I was really chewing on the differences in the Bible and being like, this is a little scary. I don't know if this thing's going to hold up.
It is.
I don't know if my faith is going to hold up through researching all of these things. I remember it being really intense, just the comparatives.
The other thing on that too, I would just add, is they don't tell you two other aspects of it, is that a lot of what we were told discrepancies that obviously Christians will apologetically explain away.
Yeah, we have our circle of reasoning that we use in those situations.
But the 2 other aspects of it that you find out, that even I think a lot of atheists or just just skeptics of any flavor, they tend to overlook, is that number one, some of the errors, quote unquote errors, were very intentional. And if you look at the way that the Greek poets wrote and the Greek philosophers, they would often teach their students they would say, in the story that I'm writing for you, look for what doesn't sound right. There's a point there. And they would encourage them to write the same way. So there's like one story in the gospel where it's like Jesus went here and then here and then here and then here. And it says, and on the way to here, he went here. You're like, wait, he went here, 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 here. And on the way to here, he went way up here. Like, that doesn't sound right. He
Yeah.
but there's a reason for it. They put that there on purpose, because anyone that knew it would be like, ding, 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 we see this is obviously not the way you do it. You wouldn't go here, 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 here on the way to here. That's the point. And they would weave points in. And the other part of it that they don't tell you is that a lot of these things are based on arguments. That the reason you have different gospels and different aspects of in the epistles, different attitudes, is people are arguing within the text. There's a reason that they say it's this number here and this number here. There's a reason that Paul says in one chapter, he says, if you want to eat meat to an idol, go ahead. Who cares? An idol's not real. There's no real God there. So go ahead and do it. Who cares? And then 2 chapters later, he says, don't you dare do it. That's the work of the devil. We don't have anything to do with that. Well, there's a reason that they're literally like somebody's adding to the scripture, arguing with whoever wrote, not Paul, but whoever wrote the Paul we think of as Paul, whoever wrote the First Corinthians, is arguing against him in the same passage, or later even epistle against epistle, where Paul has these ladies that are helping him and doing great work, very public work. And then in the epistles, it says the women should remain silent in the churches if they have something to say.
1 Timothy 2:12, my most hated scripture of all.
Ask your husbands at home, but don't talk in church. It's like, well, how can Paul have had these women that were publicly making noise and making a big racket in the church world, and then he says this? Well, it's because it's not him. It's someone else arguing. And the discrepancies are not just discrepancies of error. The discrepancies because you have voices and people, really trying to make a point and trying to basically say, hey, I'm Paul, even though they're not. I'm Paul, so you should listen to me. And let me clarify what you thought and kind of piggyback on the first argument, but clarify, because that was what Midrash was all about. Midrash, this interpretive thing, was the rabbis would say, let me take a previous scripture, and but you all didn't realize, but there's a spiritual meaning to it. I'm going to spiritualize it and then explain it the real way, so you can really get the deep meaning. And it's like all that stuff, it's amazing to me, so many different aspects of it that were in there. Let me ask this before I move on to the next point, and probably our last one here, because I know I've kept you for a while, but did you know about the Pythagoras in the New Testament?
I actually think I heard it from listening to some of your
other videos.
Yes, yeah.
I think that's fascinating. I mean, people can draw what conclusion they want, but if John 21, for anyone that hasn't heard it, Pythagoras, if you see where he pulls in the fish and they count them, it's 153 fish.
Yes.
If you were a Pythagorean, you would have alarm bells going off. And by the way, the Essenes were known as Pythagoreans. So fascinating stuff.
Yeah, there is so much there to uncover that, even the few things that took me down my path, it's almost I just wonder how people stay in it. I do. I mean, I know that I was indoctrinated, which makes sense that I went well into my late 20s in faith. However, I don't know. Because I don't want to be offensive, but I just wonder how someone who's not indoctrinated comes into faith as an adult. Where that's not a part of their upbringing. Like my dad, I mean, he was raised Lutheran, but they weren't very churchy. I still try to figure out what was it? There had to be a brokenness or something in there that he just couldn't find answers to come into this thing and to sell out to it. Because I feel like now, and if I hadn't had to go through indoctrination, I don't know if I would have bought any of that stuff. I hope that I wouldn't have, but I'd probably say that now after having come out of it, though. I'm sure it'd be very different as an adult hearing this stuff for the first time, or finally being willing to listen to it.
Yeah, I think with people, when they really have an open mind to really do the digging, they realize that this stuff is it's fraught with mythology. This stuff has legend and mythology written all over it, and just even the fact that just the one simple fact that there were so many historians that would have easily written about Jesus when he was living, and none of them did. There's like a whole list of historians that were writing about all kinds of stuff, very similar to, you know, what Jesus, they would have eaten Jesus up. They would say, oh, let's write all kinds of stuff about him. All those
Yeah.
historians, they don't say anything about him. They're just like,
Yeah.
all those historians, they're just quiet. There's so many issues that it just doesn't add up anymore. But I know I've taken you way over probably our expected time, but I did want to ask just one more question here at the end, because I think a lot of people would probably, and I do have other topics to bring in, but I'll hopefully do a follow-up with you at some point.
Sure,
But
sure.
wanted to ask one, so I thought it was one of my kids. It was my dog. I think she's saying she's ready for dinner. But a lot of people would have a tough time understanding life without Christ, in the sense of, like, if Christ is all in all, if he's your life, he's your beauty, he's your glory, he's your sense of identity, of value, he's your eternal home and hope, your hope of glory, to see Christ and be like him. He is the light of the world. He's the light of your life. He is the love of your life. You take all this stuff away, and the end result is obviously nothing but darkness, nothing but emptiness, nothing but basically fighting God in a way that is impossible. You can't really fight God, so you're basically trying to, as they say in Paul, in Acts, kicking against the pricks, which is a quote, by the way, of a Greek Greek philosopher, Greek play. Kicking against the pricks was a plagiarism. But as Paul says, as he plagiarizes, you're kicking against the pricks of God. You can't fight God and win. You are basically taking a turn from everything good into everything bad. And when you do this, there's nothing left. And I think a lot of people can't fathom the idea that that's not remotely true or real, that you are stepping into something absolutely beautiful. And I wanted to ask, could you paint a picture of issues like peace, issues like joy, issues like just understanding reality? What is it like? This is my summarization of what I'm trying to get to. What is it like leaving that, both maybe immediately, like what is it like in the first month or two, and as you get settled and do some healing from religious trauma and blah blah blah, as you really become really grounded in your new identity, what is it like to be someone who has left a theistic worldview?
At first, it's frightening because of community and leaving community behind, the fear of offending other people by leaving faith. I really genuinely care about people, always have. And my core of everything I've ever believed is love. I believed God is love. And so I was able to hold on to love being, my tattoo on my arm says, let love lead. It's all about love, loving each other. And that was the one part of my foundation I didn't have to leave behind, which was wonderful. And I just kind of held on to that with everything in me, even when I was angry, when I was afraid of what people would think. And even though I was kind of hanging out in that liberal Christian thought process, not really calling myself a Christian, but definitely not saying that I didn't believe in God, my backing on that was I still believe in love. So, that should work for now. There was a lot of undoing that happened very slowly for me. So because I let go of fear first, and it wasn't, a lot of people will share, I don't know how to stop being afraid of hell, but because that was like the first thing for me that really let me walk away, I didn't have any fears anymore. I was afraid of demons, and I was afraid of all of these, monsters that I made up in my head that weren't real. So once the reality of life became, and because I was looking for spiritual things to fill in the gaps, I really was. I was looking into like anything, honestly. It was like astrology. What else can I find here? Astrology is like older than my faith, so maybe there's something there. I was just looking for answers to fill in the gaps now, because I wanted to plug into a new system. there was like this feeling that I had to find an answer. And then I kind of just rested in not knowing, just being okay with not knowing and saying like, I'll figure it out in time. The good news is that I'm not going to hell, and that I am still extremely morally grounded, and I'm just going to walk in that. It's a lot of, when people find out you're an atheist, it's almost like you have to tell them you're a moral atheist, so they don't think that you're just like off the rails, you know, willing to murder people and stuff because there's no penalty or punishment for it. It's like people don't believe that you can live a genuine, kind life without harming others. I have always lived by the motto of doing no harm to the people around me to the best of my ability, just living in love. And so honestly, I am just freer than I've ever been. And it felt, at first, there wasn't a lot of peace because I didn't have anything to fill in the gaps yet. So I was not scared of anything specifically, but I was still having a hard time finding peace for myself, especially when it came to death, because I just lost my inheritance. It's gone now. I'm not living for death, right? I'm not living. I always thought I'd be a martyr or something. I really did. It was something that was in me. I could see myself giving my life for the cause. And now I have to protect my life because it's literally the only thing that I have. And it changed everything. I started living in the moment. I started living for my kids. I started living for myself. I started living for other people. I started living for everything instead of this one thing, which was salvation. And honestly, it has been, once I started realizing everything else there was to live for except for my afterlife, it revolutionized my life. Everything became so important here and now. I think as Christians, we live for tomorrow. We're living for the end game, and we're building our kingdom in heaven, and just completely, I hate to say it, but you're wasting our actual physical lives. And now that I'm alive and well in here, and honestly, now the thought that when I pass away, I'm gone forever and I don't have to worry about what's going to happen next is actually very peaceful. I can rest in that now. At first I couldn't, because I was losing out on something I didn't even understand. I had no idea how to even explain heaven or anything, but I still had lost something. And then I realized that I actually gained like my actual life. I have control of it now. Everything I decide and do for myself is because I decided to do it. I actually have like gut instincts that I can lean into now, where I don't have to wait on God to tell me what to do. I'm knocking down barriers. I'm doing things for myself I've never done because I'm in control now. Nobody's taking the wheel. There's no Jesus taking the wheel when things are crazy. I am, strapping my boots up and walking out my life in a way that is productive and healing for myself and other people. And it's way more abundant than my faithful lifestyle ever was. It's just, that's how it is for me. I think a lot of people might struggle with the fear for a little while longer, but I'm always putting the Love Wins book in people's hands if they're willing to read it, because I think that it really starts to shatter that fear for people.
Yeah, I would say ditto to all that. Mine was very, the whole angst over the pain of it. I don't know, you know how that expression where people say I did my grieving beforehand. I don't know if that was part of my experience, but I had joy almost immediately. It was right at this computer 18 months or so ago, and it was within an hour. It took me about an hour to deconvert. I had been building up to it for sure for about 18 months. About 18 months ago, I was building up to it for 18 months, but it hit me. Something was like that last. It's like almost like a string of dominoes that are lined up, and your finger to flick it is like a mile away. So it's just there's no way it's going to knock down. And you just slowly take like an inch at a time, and you slowly get to it, and eventually you're like right there, and then something happens, like wham, and that last straw, it took you a long time to get that mile done, but now that you're bumped up right against the domino and you kick it, everything falls. And I just remember sitting here thinking, I don't think this is real. And it was like I was talking to myself, and it was like, is this real? Like, as if I was asking myself a question, like this conversation was like,
Yeah.
no, it's not real. I was like, is that even possible? Like, could that even, is there any way this could be, I could be concluding the right thing, that this isn't real? And
Yeah.
it just hits you like a flood, like, shit, this isn't real. This
Yeah.
is never, I mean, and it's very, you feel like you're grounded to ancient history at this point, to your
Mhm.
future, to your presence. It's like it all gets very intense for a while. You're like, it's almost like you go into like this deep recess of where you're like talking to your soul as if you had one, but you're
Yeah.
it's like you're arguing with yourself, like there's this door, this secret box inside of you that makes the ultimate decisions of life, and like that voice has been so thoroughly locked up around Jesus and everything, and it's
Mhm.
like you finally give yourself the permission to open that door and have that, and with the key, and open it and say, let's have an honest discussion. Is this real? And almost like it's like as if it was like a treasure chest full of gold, this treasure chest in your heart of hearts, and open it up expecting to find gold, and you flip open the lid and there's absolutely nothing there in Christianity, and you're like, and it just, once it hit me, it felt like a fire hydrant. You just, like, all the ramifications. But it made, what was joyful about it for me was it made sense. Instead of saying, no, I mean, number one, all this defending this craziness, defending the discrepancies, defending the genocide. I mean, you have to defend a God who wipes out entire civilizations
Yeah.
except for the young virgins. And this God who can create universes, but for some reason he's really concerned that you cut off the end of your little boy's penis. It's like, come on, this doesn't make sense. Blood magic, scapegoating,
Mhm.
death cult. This doesn't make sense anymore. And you're like, oh, I have the freedom to stop defending it. Like, really?
Yeah.
I can stop defending this religion. And then
Yeah.
you realize what brought me, I think, the most joy was realizing it was like the lottery to me. Like, almost nobody wins this. I'm sure in the big picture, people say, oh no, there's a lot of people deconverting, and that's good. But in the circles I was in,
Mhm.
if there were people deconverting, I never heard of it. So in my
Mhm.
circles, everybody was staying and everybody was faithful to the Lord Jesus Christ. And I was like, I'm one of the few, the very few in my
Yeah.
experience, who actually escaped. And I felt like it was a real escape. And I was like, these people are absolutely in a cult, just as much as I would have called Scientology or
Yeah.
Mormonism or whatever a cult. And certainly the other religions, I was like, this was a cult, and I escaped. And it felt like this, like, sigh of relief, like, at least I've got a little time left to actually do life the right way. And
Yeah.
like, it would have, I don't mean to be mean to people that are deconverting in their older years, because I'm sure that's
Yeah.
got its own pains, but like, I would have been frustrated to deconvert at 85 and then die at 86. Like, it's
Yeah.
like, okay, so you had a year in reality. And like, that's a hard thing. It just,
Reality. That's like
yeah,
what it is, right? Like you
it
woke
is.
up.
You
Like
woke
this
up,
was,
yeah.
yeah, you woke up out of a fantasy.
Yeah, or
Like,
like the Matrix. I escaped the
yeah.
pod. Someone pulled me out of the pod, and I'm now in reality. Even though reality may be harder to
Yeah.
deal with at first, it's still
Yeah.
reality. I'd rather be out of the Matrix than in it. Although I know
Absolutely.
some people would say otherwise. Um, um,
There's sometimes I miss the I don't want to call it a crutch in an offensive way, but I miss, you know, leaning into somebody else helping me and it not being all on me, but it is. And there's power in that. Being in control of my own life, that's a damn good thing. I'm never going to give up again.
yeah.
Yeah, this
What?
is my life.
Well, I have probably about a dozen more things I could easily and would want to ask about. So I would love to dive into these in the future,
Sure.
just to give people a tease on that. Certainly one of them, which is I go to a lot, is the issue of how childhood indoctrination into
Yeah.
Christianity is abusive, extremely destructive to a child's psyche, especially with, you mentioned the intimidation of fear of hell,
Yes.
and just the idea that you're very broken. I would love to dive into that more with you at some point.
Hmm.
Um, and also, I'd love to at some point touch on this whole psychology of belief. It sounds like you've done a lot of thinking through that.
Yeah.
And uh, I think a lot of these issues too, that the whole idea of reprogramming yourself, kind of, as Yoda would say, unlearning what you've learned, and
Hmm.
then, starting fresh, reclaiming your identity. Some of that stuff, it sounds like you've done a lot of hard work and head work for this space, these kind of spaces. And I would say for anyone that, in case we don't do a follow-up video for a few months, go to Summer's videos. She's talked a lot about some of these things, and some of them are short. They're 4 minutes long if you just have a few minutes, but some of them are much longer. You dive into some of these issues. And I also wanted to talk about, I feel like we couldn't do this justice if I asked you quickly, so I don't want to open this door and not do it justice. But at some point, we need to talk about shunning. Shunning is real, and you have faced that very painfully, and you've opened up very honestly about it in your videos. You've faced some pretty dark, monstrous ideas that have been shoved in your face about how you deserve to be treated now that you've left this cult of Christianity, and just what the damage that this does to people's ability to just love even the people that are closest to us. So if I could, I'd like to reserve a place on your schedule for shunning.
My whole family are still believers. So I'm just this charismatic devil woman to a lot of them.
Without diving in, you've had a lot of shunning, haven't you?
It's subtle. They don't say it to me, but I'm not invited to stuff anymore. You know, it's hurtful. It's so hurtful. I try not to think about that. But it's the aftermath of deconverting is a good topic to kind of
let's start with that next time.
Come back. I think that would be good.
We'll even call it the title, The Aftermath of Deconversion. And maybe a side issue too would just be this, the whole idea of healthiness. I think I'm really learning. There's like a post-mortem of Christianity. Like we've dove into Christianity a lot and into that, but whether it's Christianity or other religions, there's just there's ways that we realize as we deconvert that we weren't healthy, and to really embrace like a healing mentality. Obviously dealing first with the trauma, but then just to really heal and be whole and to find out what it means to be human again. I mean, maybe that's a better way to put it, is to really embrace what does it mean to be you, like, and just to get over that issue of the shame we touched about, but just to realize like I use this illustration too much probably, but like when Neo's on the bed and he's just been rescued, and they say, he says, why do my eyes hurt? And they say, you've never used your eyes before. Like they hurt because you've never been awake before. You've been in this pod. And I think there's so much in my heart for the people. Like I think my passion, and I'll end with this, is that there's people that are deconverting that are either getting so much pain from other people to push back, or they're just in so much angst over, number one, the past shame, the guilt, like, oh, I felt guilty for so long for my sins. But now they realize that it wasn't real, but they still feel so broken, like so empty. And I feel like I just want to help people, like, build them up, just like we would have built them up in Christ before. It's like, I want to build you up as a glorious, wonderful human without this crazy God character and this crazy, heaven, hell stuff. Like I think people really, really struggle with just saying, I'm okay just the way I am. And that song that just as I am, Lord, they come. But it's like, it's almost like you have to redeem Christianity and say, like, let's take the semi-good stuff and let's actually clean it up and tell people you really are good just as you are, just without Jesus.
It's hard to find purpose again in life when you were living for one thing. This is what I was created for. And now you realize you probably weren't created. I don't believe I was created. So it's like, I don't even have a spirit. It's like everything I do with my life is just whatever I want to do. Like, whoa, that's scary. It's like free falling. You're like, whoa, what am I going to do? And then, it's hard to find focus and purpose again when you leave faith. So that's good stuff to talk about, because people need to know that other people know what it feels like. And that even though we all have our own individual paths of where we're going to go, just feeling that camaraderie that they felt when they came into faith and everybody came around them and helped them figure out their way. There needs to be a place that you go when you leave faith for everyone to kind of come around you and help you to find your way out and to help heal the wounds of losing so much. Because even though you're gaining so much, it feels like a loss at first. And there's a lot of grief. There's grief and joy. And it's like this thing that just kind of combats for a little while. Like for you, it was about 18 months of, studying and seeing it. And then it was like that. And not everybody's story is like that. Some people go years, or they just don't even call themselves a Christian for a long time. And then suddenly, something sparks their interest and they've actually fully deconverted, but they weren't really into the faith. And there's so many different versions of how we wake up from this fantasy. And because I feel like I woke up. I feel like my eyes were opened.
The frustration of trying to gently wake other people up and realizing that they're just not ready, and learning to give them the patience. That's a hard challenge. But I just want to say too, just to turn it away from my story and our story a little bit, is for anyone watching, where if any of this is resonating but you are actually hurting, where you're going through this and you're like, you have no idea, you're talking about pain, but it's a lot worse than you guys are even saying. It's like, I'm sorry for the pain that some of you all are going through, and this is, your deconversion reasons are awesome. Whether you're deconverting because this guy character doesn't make sense philosophically, or because you just did a lot of historical work, keep going. Don't go back on it. God is not real, and Jesus has nothing to do with reality. You are right to move away from this, but I'm sorry for the pain, and I'm sorry for the loneliness, and reach out to people like us. We all need community now, and you're not alone. You're not going through this alone. Please don't feel like there's nowhere to go. And I know I can personally recommend several even Facebook groups where people can talk and just like, there's people to talk to. Just don't go through it alone. And also maybe it's by way of maybe advertising myself here, like when you're ready, share your story, like just like Summer did today. Share your story. People need, and I mean, not necessarily with me, but just, people need to hear when you're strong, when you're ready, and when it's safe to talk. It's not safe for everybody right now, but when it's safe to talk, share your story. People need to hear that it's going to be okay, because these are some hard topics, and we're talking about them very lightly because we've kind of got a cadence here, and we're trying to move through a lot of topics, but these are hard topics that some people need to be in counseling for months or years.
Yes.
And it's like, this is hard stuff, and we're not trying to make light of any of it. Like, take your time, heal deeply from this stuff.
Yeah, I'm in therapy, so this is not all a one-man show of work. There's a lot of effort and energy that goes into healing. In Christianity, a lot of times, we just pray and it's supposed to get better. But the truth is that when you do work internally and you've been through trauma and things like indoctrination and coming out of even other faiths, it doesn't just get better immediately. I mean, you can experience, euphoria and some awesome things in it, but there's a lot of pain and hurt to heal. You feel guilty and stupid. How could I have let myself think those things? There's a lot of, if you raised your kids in it and then you left afterward, and now you want to save your children and you can't because you raised them that way. There's a lot that goes into deconverting whatever age it is that you're leaving faith at. And that inner work, talk to somebody. It's not easy to do by yourself. And if you don't have support and you're all alone and you've discovered this all by yourself, you need just reach out, connect with anybody else that you're parallel. You notice in life, you notice that you start to parallel with other people, and take advantage of those opportunities when you notice that your life is paralleling with somebody else's, because there's a lot to learn from each other. We can really help each other heal.
Yeah. Very good point. Very good point. Well, everyone, again, we've been speaking with Summer Biby. This is, I know we're just touching the tip of the iceberg with some of these topics, but thank you for being willing to do this. And again, everyone, I know I've said this twice, but I'll say it one more last time. Go to her videos. This was a very kind of even conversation, but in your videos, you go into some of the emotional sides of this. You bring a passion and just an intensity that we need. We as in the atheist community, we need that kind of passion, that joy for life, that zest. And so everyone, please go watch her videos, and I'll be watching, looking for the next video you make out there. Let's like and subscribe to her channel. Let's give Summer a lot of love and a lot of attention. Her voice needs to get much more widely published in our conversations. And just thank you for being willing to share your heart, both today and in your videos. And just keep at it. We need what you're doing.
Thank you. And thank you for the work that you're doing, Tim. There's a lot of intellectual labor that you're doing. And a lot of people need to understand all of the puzzle pieces as they align, and they cannot leave faith without that. It's not going to be an emotional escape for them. They need the intellectual labor that you're doing. That is so huge for a lot of people to walk away from faith. So thank you, because it's a lot of work, and I can see the labor of love that you're putting into this. It's a big deal. Thank you.
It is. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. Yeah, and I definitely, I would do have a project coming up soon here. I'll plug for about hopefully 3 or 4 months from now, a big project about where the New Testament, what it's quoting, where it's often literally just quoting and plagiarizing, and other places where it's just referencing. But look forward to that. And also for anyone that wants to dive in, what you said, just maybe remember, if you're just looking for you're not sure you're ready to go neck deep in this stuff, but you're just curious to have a little bit of insights. One of the best groups that I'm working with, and the videos, it's called Myth Vision. Go to their YouTube channel. Derek Lambert is the man, the myth, the legend. Go to Myth Vision. Go to his Myth Vision podcast group on Facebook. Go to his Myth Vision radio page on YouTube. You will see so many cool videos that will walk you through where the Bible really came from. It will be an eye-opener, and all topics are on the table in his group. So I just want to add that there to anyone that's like, well, this sounds interesting, but I want more. Myth Vision will give you more very quickly. So thank you to Derek Lambert for his work too. Well, Summer, thank you again. I can't wait till the next time. We'll do it again soon.
Nice talking to you, Tim. Bye.
Thank you.